The sky stretched pale and cold above the ridge as Clara eased her truck to a stop. The old Chevy groaned in protest, tires crunching over loose gravel before settling still. The air was sharp, the kind that stung the lungs and carried a faint scent of pine and earth damp from a night's frost. Clara stayed in the cab a moment longer than she needed to, fingers resting tight on the steering wheel, knuckles blanched white. It had been 5 years since she'd last set eyes on this place. 5 years since the fire had licked up the hills and choked the sky with smoke. Since she pulled the black filly from the snarled wire and whispered promises she couldn't keep. She told herself she wouldn't come back, not after the way it ended. And yet, here she was, boots scuffed, coat too thin for the season, and a hollow ache in her chest that hadn't dulled with time. She pushed open the door. The cold bit into her skin instantly. Gravel shifted beneath her boots as she stepped out, brushing the stray strands of chestnut hair from her face. The wind curled around her ears, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves drumming softly against frozen earth. Her eyes followed the sound instinctively. The herd was there, just past her eyes, a dozen shapes grazing in the gray light, their breath visible in faint clouds. Some lifted their heads as she approached, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring at her scent. Most went back to the grass, unconcerned. And then she saw her. The black mare stood apart from the others, her silhouette striking even in stillness. She was larger now, stronger, but the crescent-shaped marking on her forehead was unmistakable, a pale arc of white against the ink of her coat. Clara felt her chest tighten painfully. "She's alive," she breathed, barely aware she'd spoken aloud. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. The mare's dark eyes met hers across the expanse of frosted grass, and something sharp and electric passed between them. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The mare's ears pricked forward, then pinned back. Her tail lashed once. "Do you remember me?" Clara asked softly, though she knew the wind would steal her words before they carried. The mare took a step forward. A sharp whinny cut through the cold air, startling a few of the younger horses into sidestepping nervously. But the black mare didn't move closer. Her muscles coiled tight, and she pawed the ground, mane whipping as the breeze turned fierce. That's when Clara saw it. The mare's left hind leg moved stiffly, dragging slightly as she shifted her weight. Even from this distance, the limp was unmistakable. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd hoped the injury had healed, that the sanctuary had kept their promise to give her the care she needed. Instead, the sight of that faltering step felt like a blade sliding between Clara's ribs. Guilt, hot and sudden, flared inside her. She remembered the filly's cries as she cut her free from the wire, her small body trembling with exhaustion. She remembered the night spent in the old barn, bottle-feeding her and stroking her soft muzzle as her father coughed in the house. Saving that horse had been the one thing that kept Clara together that summer. And when the debts came calling after her father passed, when she had no choice but to give the filly up, she told herself it was for the best. The sanctuary had promised her open fields, care, and freedom. But seeing the mare now, with that same fire in her eyes and that same broken step, Clara wondered if she'd only traded one prison for another. She took a slow step forward. The frost cracked beneath her boots. The mare's head shot up, nostrils flaring wide. For a moment, Clara thought she might bolt. "It's okay, girl," Clara murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." The mare's ears twitched. Clara inched forward again, her heart pounding so hard she could feel in her throat. But before she could take another step, the mare gave a sharp toss of her head and turned away. The limp was more pronounced now, her dark tail flicking angrily. With a snort, she trotted a few paces, then broke into an awkward, limping gallop that carried her into the tree line. The rest of the herd followed in a flurry of movement, their hooves thundering softly over the frozen ground. Clara stopped where she stood. The cold settled deep in her bones as she watched the black mare disappear among the pines. "She doesn't trust me any more," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Her hands felt heavy as she shoved them into her coat pockets. She hadn't come to stay. That wasn't the plan. She'd told herself she only wanted to see the mare, to convince herself she'd done the right thing all those years ago. But now, seeing her like this, alone, limping, still burning with wildness, Clara wasn't sure she could walk away again. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches overhead. A storm was moving in. Clara turned back toward her truck. She would stay the night in the cabin. Just one night, she promised herself. Long enough to shake the ghosts loose and leave them behind. But as she reached for the door handle, the sound cut through the rising wind. A faint, frantic whinny. Clara froze. Her breath clouded in the cold air. The sound came again, sharper this time, carried from somewhere deeper in the woods. Her heart lurched. She spun toward the trees, scanning the shadowed undergrowth. "Where are you?" she called, her voice breaking. The whinny rose again, edged with panic. Clara didn't think. She ran. Clara's boots slipped in the wet leaves as she pushed through the trees, branches clawing at her coat. The sound of the frantic whinny tore through the woods again, sharper now, like a scream. Her pulse raced. The storm had moved in faster than she expected. Rain slicked her hair to her cheeks, and the air crackled with the electric scent of ozone. She stumbled over a root and caught herself against the trunk of a pine, ignoring the sting in her palm. "Hang on," she whispered into the wind, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the horse or herself. The sound came again. Closer. She broke into a run, weaving between trunks, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the wind. The trees opened suddenly into a narrow clearing, and that's when she saw her. The black mare thrashed in a tangle of barbed wire, her eyes rolling white. Blood streaked her flank where the metal had bitten deep. The wire snaked across the ground, a forgotten fence half swallowed by years of undergrowth. The mare's screams ripped through the storm as she yanked against the barbs, her muscles bunching with wild terror. Clara's chest constricted. "It's okay. Easy," she called out, raising her hand slowly. The mare's ears flicked back. She snorted, flaring her nostrils, and jerked violently against the fence. The wire groaned, cutting deeper into her leg. "Don't do that," Clara whispered hoarsely. "You're going to tear it worse." She inched forward, boots sinking into the mud. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her mind spinning with memories of another summer, another time the filly had been caught and bleeding. Back then, the horse had trusted her, eventually. But now, Clara crouched low, her voice soft but steady. "Hey, girl, remember me? You know I won't hurt you." The mare froze, sides heaving. Her ears swiveled forward, then back again. Clara slipped her hand into her coat pocket and pulled out the old multi-tool, the metal cold against her palm. She could still feel the heat of the fire from 5 years ago, smell the singed hair, hear the frantic cries as she worked to cut the filly free. "You're okay," she murmured. "We'll get through this, just like before." The mare snorted again, but didn't pull away as Clara crept closer. When she was close enough to touch, Clara knelt in the mud, rain running down her face. She reached for the wire with trembling hands, careful not to make any sudden movements. The barbs were twisted tight around the mare's leg, cutting through flesh and fur. Blood oozed steadily, mixing with the mud below. "That's a good girl," Clara whispered. "Brave girl." Her fingers worked clumsily at first, slipping on the wet wire. The mare shifted, tossing her head. "Easy now. I've got you." She managed to loosen the first strand, but the second was wound tighter. Her heart thudded painfully as she pried at the metal, ignoring the sting when a barb caught her glove and sliced through to her skin. The mare's breathing slowed slightly. Clara's own voice was shaking now. "We've done this before. You remember that, don't you?" With one final twist, the wire sprang loose. The mare flinched and jerked backward, breaking free. She staggered, nearly falling, then caught herself. Clara scrambled to her feet, her chest tight. The mare stood trembling, her leg bleeding but free. Rain plastered her black coat to her body, and her wild eyes fixed on Clara. "You're okay," Clara said softly. "You're safe now." For a moment, the mare didn't move. Then, with a sharp snort, she turned and bolted into the trees. Clara stumbled after her, but the mare's limping form vanished into the storm. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice cracking. The woods swallowed the sound whole. Clara stopped, her shoulders sagging. Her throat burned, her breath hitching in her chest. She pressed her muddy hands to her face. She'd come back to see her, maybe to convince herself she'd done the right thing all those years ago. But now, seeing her wounded and running. She couldn't shake the feeling that leaving her again would be unforgivable. The rain fell harder, drumming against the leaves. Clara stood in the clearing, soaked to the bone, as thunder rumbled overhead. She turned back toward the cabin. If the mare was hurt as badly as she feared, there wouldn't be much time. She couldn't walk away. Not again. As Clara trudged back through the trees, her mind was already racing. There was an old horse trailer behind the cabin, long neglected but maybe still usable. The vet's office was miles away, but she could make it if she started at first light. The thought tightened her chest. She let the filly go once before. It had nearly broken her then. She wouldn't make the same mistake twice. This time, she would fight for her, even if it cost her everything. Clara woke to the sound of the wind howling outside, rattling the thin walls of the cabin like restless hands. She'd slept little, her dreams full of barbed wire and dark eyes staring through her, pleading and wild all at once. Sitting up on the narrow cot, she rubbed her gritty eyes and listened for a sound, any sound, that might tell her the mare had made it through the night. But there was only silence, thick and unsettling, broken by the occasional groan of the old wooden beams. She pulled on her boots and stepped into the frigid morning. The sky was leaden, swollen with the threat of more rain, and her breath curled out in pale clouds. Her gaze swept across the field. Nothing moved among the pines. "Please," she whispered to herself, a prayer that felt too fragile for the weight in her chest. The plan had taken shape in the restless hours before dawn. There was still an old trailer parked at the edge of the clearing, half swallowed by weeds. If she could coax the mare inside, she might get her to the vet. It wasn't much of a plan. It was desperate and dangerous, but it was the only one she had. Clara's boots sank into soft earth as she crossed the trailer. The door protested with a rusty shriek as she pried it open. Inside, cobwebs clung like ghosts. She grabbed a broom from the porch and swept out the worst of it, her mind racing. The mare was wild. She might fight, might refuse to step into the claustrophobic space. Clara couldn't blame her. When she stepped back into the field, she froze. The mare was there. She stood at the edge of the trees, her black coat gleaming in the weak light. One ear flicked forward, the other back, her head held high as her dark eyes fixed on Clara. The limp in her left hind leg was worse than yesterday. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, tail swishing once before settling still again. Clara swallowed hard. "You came back," she murmured. The mare didn't move. Clara reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the apple she'd taken from the cabin. She held it out, her voice low and steady. "You're hurt, girl. Let me help you." The mare's ears flicked. Clara took a careful step forward, then another. Each movement was measured, her boots barely making a sound in the wet grass. The mare tossed her head but didn't back away. Clara's heart pounded as she closed the distance, murmuring softly, "I know you're scared. I am too." She could smell the horse now, warm and sharp beneath the faint copper tang of blood. When she was close enough to touch, Clara extended her hand slowly. The mare's nostrils flared as she sniffed the apple, her lips twitching. "That's it," Clara whispered. The mare took the apple gently, her teeth brushing Clara's palm. For a fleeting moment, they stood there, a fragile thread of trust stretching between them. Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. Good girl. Brave girl. But the sound of a distant crack, a tree limb snapping under the weight of last night's storm, made the mare flinch. Her muscles bunched, and she took a halting step back, the limp forcing her to stumble slightly. Clara kept her voice calm, though panic threatened to rise. "It's okay. It's just the wind." She moved to the mare's side, her fingers brushing against the damp fur of her neck. The horse quivered, but didn't bolt. Clara slipped the lead rope over her neck in one fluid motion, her heart hammering. "You're all right," she murmured. "We're going to get through this." Leading her toward the trailer was like leading a shadow, light, tentative steps, a tension in the rope that threatened to snap with one wrong move. When they reached the trailer's open door, the mare stopped dead. Clara felt it instantly, the way her whole body stiffened. "I know," Clara said softly. "I hate it too." The mare sniffed at the ramp, nostrils flaring, her tail flicking in agitation. Clara stepped up onto the ramp, tugging gently on the rope. Just one step, girl. That's all. The mare's hooves clattered against the edge of the ramp as she shifted her weight. Clara held her breath. The first step came haltingly, the mare's ears swiveling back. That's it, Clara whispered. You're so close. The second step was quicker, more certain, but when the wind rattled the loose siding of the trailer, the mare snorted in alarm and lurched back, almost yanking the rope from Clara's grasp. No! Clara cried, digging in her heels. Don't run. The mare danced sideways, her injured leg faltering. Clara stepped down from the ramp, pressing her forehead against the horse's quivering neck. Please don't fight me. I can't lose you again. The mare's breathing was ragged, but she didn't pull away. Clara straightened and tried again. This time, the mare followed her up the ramp, trembling but steady. When her hind legs cleared the edge, Clara swung the door shut and latched it with shaking hands. She pressed her palms to the cool metal, her whole body trembling. You did it, she whispered. But the hardest part was still ahead. Clara climbed into the truck and started the engine. As the old vehicle rumbled to life, she caught a glimpse of the mare in the side mirror, dark and still, her ears flicking nervously. We'll get there, Clara murmured. I promise. She didn't let herself think about how far the vet's office was, or how much worse the leg might be than she could see. She only gripped the wheel tighter and kept her eyes on the winding road as the truck crawled down the mountain, each turn slick with mud and scattered debris. The mare shifted in the trailer, the sound of her hooves thudding softly against the wooden floor. Hang on, girl, Clara whispered. But deep down, a cold knot of fear twisted in her gut. What if she was already too late? The truck rattled to a halt in front of the small veterinary clinic, its headlights cutting through the thick curtain of rain. Clara gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, her heart pounding as if it might crack her ribs. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The black mare shifted in the trailer behind her, the sound of her unsteady hooves a sharp reminder that every second counted. Clara forced herself to breathe. She wiped at her fog windshield with the sleeve of her coat, her pulse thundering in her ears. The door to the clinic swung open, spilling warm light onto the gravel lot. A young woman in a pale blue coat stepped out, shielding her eyes from the storm. You need help? She called over the rain. Clara shoved open the driver's side door and stumbled out. She's hurt, she shouted, her voice raw. Her leg, barbed wire, she's bleeding bad. The vet's eyes darted to the trailer. Her expression tightened. Is she halt or broke? She was once, Clara said, breathless. But she's wild now. Please. She won't make it if we don't do something. There was a pause, and for a moment Clara thought the woman might refuse. But then the vet nodded curtly. Back her up to the side barn. We'll take a look. Clara scrambled back into the cab and eased the truck forward, every bump in the muddy lot making her flinch. When she reached the barn doors, two assistants in rubber boots were already waiting. Keep her calm, one of them said as Clara climbed down. She trusts me, Clara murmured, though her voice wavered. The trailer door groaned as she pulled it open. The mare's dark eyes glinted in the dim light, wide and panicked. Her nostrils flared as she tossed her head, the whites of her eyes showing. Easy, girl, Clara whispered, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of blood and damp horsehair. It's okay. I'm right here. She slid a hand down the lead rope, feeling the tension vibrating through the mare's body. You've done harder things than this. So have I. Slowly, carefully, she led her down the ramp. The mare stumbled once, nearly losing her balance, but Clara pressed her hand against her neck and whispered softly until she steadied. The limp was worse now, the leg swollen and raw. Blood trickled sluggishly down her fetlock. The vet stepped forward, eyes sharp but cautious. She's in shock. Let's get her inside. Inside the barn, the air was warmer, filled with the faint antiseptic tang of iodine and hay. Clara stood at the mare's head as the vet knelt by the injured leg, her gloved fingers probing gently. She's lucky she didn't sever the tendon, the vet murmured. But the cut's deep, infected too. Clara swallowed hard. You can fix it, right? I can clean and stitch it. Get her on antibiotics, the vet said. But the leg may never heal fully. She might not run again, not like before. Clara's fingers tightened in the mare's damp mane. I don't care if she never runs again. Just save her. The vet glanced up, her eyes softening slightly. She's a fighter. That helps. For hours, Clara stayed at the mare's side as the vet worked, holding her steady, murmuring low reassurances as the sedative dulled her panic. She thought of the long summer nights years ago, sitting on the barn floor with the filly curled against her knees, and how much she'd needed that small, frightened creature then. When it was over, the mare's leg was wrapped tight in clean bandages, her breathing slow and heavy. She'll need weeks of care, the vet said gently. She won't survive without someone willing to fight for her. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. The vet gave her a long look before nodding. Then we'll make it work. Later, when the barn had gone still and the storm outside had softened to a whisper, Clara sat cross-legged in the straw beside the sleeping mare. The air smelled of rain and antiseptic, her hands raw from scrubbing and her body aching with exhaustion. You've always been stubborn, she whispered into the quiet. That's why I love you. The mare shifted slightly in her sleep, a soft huff escaping her nostrils. Clara reached out and let her fingers graze the velvety curve of her nose. We're going to get through this. Both of us. But as she spoke, a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. The vet's words echoed in her mind. She might not heal fully. Clara stared at the mare's bandaged leg, her chest aching with the weight of it all. She had saved her once before. She would do it again. She had to. But as the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracks in the barn wall, Clara couldn't shake the question pressing at the back of her mind. Would it be enough this time? The air was sharp enough to sting Clara's lungs as she stepped out of her truck and into the pale light of early morning. The frost clung stubbornly to the grass, crunching beneath her boots as she stood motionless, taking it all in. The hills stretched out like dark shoulders under a bruised sky, the pines bowing slightly as the wind slid between them. She shoved her hands deeper into her coat pockets, as if the gesture could still her racing pulse. 5 years was a long time, and yet not long enough. The place was the same, and not the same. The fire had licked through here all those years ago, swallowing acres of grassland, leaving behind a blackened wound across the valley. Nature had healed some of it since then. Grass had grown back. Saplings poked bravely through the ash. But Clara still remembered how it had smelled. The thick, choking smoke, the acrid tang of burning wood. And she remembered the filly's scream, shrill and raw, carrying to the roar of the flames as if it would rip open the sky. Clara drew in a slow breath, forcing her thoughts back to the present. She scanned the ridge, her heart thudding. They were there. The herd moved like shadows against the steel-gray horizon, their bodies sleek and strong as they picked at the sparse winter grass. Hooves cracked frost, tails swished lazily. Clara's eyes darted across their ranks, looking for one in particular. And then she saw her. The black mare stood a little apart from the others, still and watchful. Even at a distance, Clara felt the air shift around her. The mare's coat gleamed like spilled ink, dark and fluid, and on her forehead, just above her wide-set eyes, the crescent-shaped marking glimmered pale in the half-light. Clara's breath hitched. It was her, the filly she once pulled from a tangle of barbed wire, skin and fur torn bloody, bones trembling under a too-light frame. The horse she'd sat with night after night in the old barn, bottle-feeding her milk, while her father's raspy cough echoed to the thin walls of the ranch house. The one she let go, a hard knot formed in Clara's throat. The mare's ears flicked forward. For the briefest second, her gaze seemed to catch on Clara, pinning her in place. The world seemed to narrow to that one thin line stretched between them, so fragile it could snap with a breath. Do you remember me? Clara murmured, though her words were lost in the wind. The mare snorted softly, tossing her head. Her mane lifted in the breeze like a banner, and for a heartbeat Clara thought she might step forward. But then the horse shifted her weight, and Clara's gut clenched. The limp was slight, but unmistakable. Even from here, She could see how the mare favored her left hind leg, dragging it slightly as she turned her body. The old injury hadn't healed. Clara's nails bit into her palms, inside her coat pockets. They'd promised her the filly would be cared for. The sanctuary had assured her the leg would heal given time, that she'd run wild and free across open pastures. Clara had clung to that image, using it to silence the guilt that threatened to devour her when she signed the papers and watched the trailer door shut. But the reality stood before her now, dark and wounded and still burning with that wild light. Clara took a tentative step forward. The mare's head shot up, her ears flattened, her nostrils flaring as her muscles bunched. "It's okay," Clara whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The mare tossed her head again and let out a sharp whinny that sent a ripple of unease through the rest of the herd. Hooves stamped the frost. A chestnut gelding snorted and trotted nervously in a tight circle, but the black mare held her ground for a moment longer, her eyes locked on Clara's. Clara felt her chest tighten, her breath shallow. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I shouldn't have left you." As if on cue, the mare wheeled suddenly and bolted toward a tree lean, her gait uneven. The herd followed in a flurry of movement, their hooves thundering over the frozen earth. Clara stood rooted in place as the sound of their retreat faded into the woods. Her shoulders sagged. She'd told herself she only wanted to see the mare, just one last glimpse to quiet the ghost that had gnawed at her all these years. She wasn't supposed to stay. She wasn't supposed to let the old wounds open up again. But seeing her now, limping, still fierce in her wildness, Clara wasn't sure she could walk away this time. The wind picked up, sharp and biting. Clara turned toward the cabin that squatted a few hundred yards away. Its roof sagged and moss had crept up the stone chimney, but it would serve for the night. Just one night, she told herself. Long enough to convince herself she'd done all she could. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as she pushed the door open. The air inside smelled of cedar and dust. She dropped her pack near the hearth and rubbed her arms to chase off the chill. She sat heavily on the edge of the cot, staring into the darkness. Maybe she'd leave in the morning. The storm gathered outside, wind rattling the window panes. And then it came, a faint sound, barely audible above the rising wind. Clara froze. A whinny, high-pitched, frantic. Her heart seized. She shot to her feet and rushed to the door. The sound came again, sharper now, carried across the stormy air. Clara yanked on her coat and bolted outside, her boots slipping on the wet earth. "Where are you?" she called, her voice cracking as she ran toward the trees. The only answer was another desperate cry, echoing through the storm. She didn't hesitate. Clara plunged into the woods, rain slicking her hair to her face, her breath coming fast. She had found the mare once before. She prayed she wasn't too late this time.